Good afternoon. How is everyone today? Woo! Good. Thank you and welcome to Just Wrapped, the NEH K-12 Institute using comics to teach social justice. My name is Pamela Jackson. I am the comic arts librarian at San Diego State University Library. I'm also the co-director of SDSU Center for Comic Studies and the co-PI on this grant. So should we go out of order, or you want to go in order to introduce yourselves? Let's go to Beth first.
I think we have a slide for this, right?
Yes, so here we go. Beth.
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Pollard. I'm looking at the slide like it's going to tell me the answers here. I am with Pam, the co-PI on the grant that made this institute possible. I'm a professor of history at San Diego State University, and I am the co-director of the Center for Comic Studies.
Katie.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Katie Sherba. I am now an assistant professor of literacies and children's literature at the University of Georgia, but I was at San Diego State, which is how I got connected with the amazing Beth and Pam to launch this project, to help them with this project. And that photo is actually with one of my participants in a research project that I did, and that was our first Comic-Con appearance. And I'm very sad he wasn't here this year, but it was fun.
Marcella.
Hi, I'm Marcella Bridson. I'm a 7th grade teacher of Humanities in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Thank you. Daryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daryl Hawkins. I'm a K-5 media specialist, school library media specialist from Atlanta, Georgia.
Great. Morgan.
Hi, I'm Morgan Phillips, and I'm a high school social studies teacher in State College, Pennsylvania.
And Evalani.
Hello, I'm Evalani Wilson. I teach 6th grade U.S. history in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Okay, so a little bit about the grant. Beth, do you want to talk about the grant?
Sure, I can talk about the grant. Do we have a slide for me to talk about the grant? I think we do. We do, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Let me start this out with and see if everyone gets it.
Yeah.
This is the true story of 25 K-12 teachers picked to travel to San Diego State University, work together, and have some fun for 2 weeks to find out what happens when people start getting real and begin using comics in their curriculum.
Yes. Yes.
MTV
Yes.
Real World riff, if anyone didn't get that. Okay, Beth, you want to talk a little about the grant?
Okay, so that was the fun version about our grant. The serious version about our grant is that this whole program that we're about to tell you about was made possible through a program funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it's the Summer Institute for K-12 Teachers program. And when Pam and I started coming up with this, we were writing this grant, coming up with all these ideas. We're like, do you really think that they'll fund this? This is just too fun. Because our whole plan was, as Pam mentioned, to have 25 K-12 teachers from across the country to come here to San Diego to undertake a course of study that would hopefully transform their teaching and have an impact in the place to which they return. The NEH funds these programs. There's many of them every summer, and we were delighted that ours was funded and that we got to bring this great group of people here to our campus.
Excellent. So I call this the pod people slide.
Yes.
We had our groups split into 5 different pods. A little bit about how we did our selections. So we got 202 applicants, which we're told by the NEH is incredible. So we had a high applicant pool. The grades taught distribution broke down, we had about 115 applicants from grades 9 to 12, 60 from grades 6 to 8, and 25 from 3 to 5, and then we had 2 that were K2.
Sorry, we just got our nameplates, so we're sort of passing them out.
Yeah, I gotta have my name.
This is when we give the formal stats of our program. So 10 of the participants that we selected to come here to San Diego had taught 5 years or less, and the average number of years teaching across all 25 participants was 9.16 years. So we had a wonderful variety of teachers. We wanted to get some teachers who were relatively new, some teachers who we call seasoned, and then a bunch of teachers who were sort of in the middle, both with respect to their time in with teaching, but also with respect to their familiarity with teaching with comics and teaching social justice related topics.
And we're happy to say that the accepted participants traveled from, I think it's 16 or 19 different, 16 different states. So we have people here from, and a lot of you in the audience are some of our participants as well. We have people from California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, North Carolina, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and Washington State.
And our participants teach at a wide variety of institutions. They teach at public schools, so 21 of our participants are public school teachers. 1 is a private school teacher, and 3 teach at charter schools.
And again, they're from multiple grade levels, so we have 5 that teach in grades 3 through 5. Some of those had accepted new jobs by the time they got here, so we have a kindergarten teacher here as well. 10 who are at the 6 through 8 level, and 10 that were at the 9 through 12 level.
And we had a pretty even number of teachers of English language arts and teachers of history, social studies.
So, participants on the panel, we know why we picked you. It was Katie, Beth, and I on the selection panel. We know why we picked you, but why did you choose to apply to this institute? Anyone want to jump in there?
I'll start.
All right.
All right, so Comic-Con has been a goal of mine for years, and I wanted to find an avenue to get here in some way. But also, as a school librarian, my students enjoy a lot of graphic novels and comics, so my goal is always trying to figure out 2 things. One, how I can get more of those resources in my library, and also make sure that I can add a little bit more of a standards-based approach to it, so that teachers will be able to more effectively use them in the classroom for instruction.
Thank you.
Dang, me next. Hard to follow that guy. So my biggest goal as a teacher and as an educator is to always be working towards a more anti-racist, equitable system, right? And so like social justice are buzzwords that really hooked me. But then reading about all of the amazing resources that they're gonna provide me, continually finding ways to engage my students in reading and to really be responsive to the changing face of what my students look like and the things that they care about are what really brought me here, and it worked. This program has like afforded me so many wonderful opportunities and ways to learn new things and to implement new things in my classroom. So very lucky.
I'm gonna say ditto to what Daryl said about Comic-Con, ditto to what Marcella said about the social justice components. But also, I'm entering my 20th year of teaching, and so I know, right? Woo!
Yeah,
And so, in doing something for quite a while, I want to find something that I had not done before, to be able to engage my students. And also, I recently got into comics. I was like, ooh, new interest, engage my students, sounds like a winner. Here I am.
Yeah, when it came to my decision to apply to this NEH in particular, I have already really tried heavily to incorporate social justice issues into my classes. I teach an elective on diversity and social justice, but I wanted to find new ways to incorporate visual media and specifically media literacy in response to visuals to get my students more engaged through like a variety of mediums. And I thought comics would be a really interesting and relevant way for my students to engage with pop culture and relate that to social justice.
Awesome. We've spent the last almost 2 weeks together, so yes, this is wonderful. Beth, would you like to tell us a little more about the curriculum for this institute?
Right, so as much fun as we've all had together these past, almost 2 weeks, the goal was to create a scholarly curriculum that would bring our participants to learn from the faculty experts that we have access to at San Diego State University. So we had a number of different faculty come in to lecture on a range of topics. So 10 different faculty from SDSU and beyond came to SDSU to talk to our folks about everything from what's a comic, the war on comics, so the issue of banned books. It just so happens that when a comic deals with social justice issues, it tends to be a banned book. So we wanted someone to talk about that. We had a number of experts talk about issues such as comics in public libraries, queering comics. You can see them all up there on the slide. And each of these experts was incredibly generous with their time. They built a module on Canvas, which is a course delivery platform some of you are probably familiar with. They built a module with clear learning outcomes of what they wanted the participants to experience. They shared a number of different readings with the participants. They led a lecture, oftentimes quite interactive. and then they followed up with some further readings for our participants.
So at times that might have felt like a fire hose to you all, coming at you with a lot of content. How did you experience that for the participants?
I'll start out. We'll go back and forth. So I think when it came to the curriculum for this entire NEH, I thought it was really well balanced. I thought that it gave a lot of representation and kind of examples within the comics of various identities being represented and social justice issues related to that. And then beyond that, I think I really enjoyed, in particular, learning about the comic element of just kind of understanding the development of and also the use of comics in education, because that's something I wasn't super familiar with prior to that. But then seeing how we can weave the content in with that as a pedagogical practice was really useful.
I'll go next. I love learning, so although sometimes a little fire hose-like, I enjoyed it all very much, took copious notes that I'm going to go back and look at. But I really, really love that it was so many different topics, because there are so many, social justice issues that we are facing, our students are facing. But also, I didn't realize that, comics do this, comics talk about this. And so learning all of this has just been, it's been amazing. So I really can't wait to go and take it back.
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that they did that was really awesome, other than presenting us with like a wide range of perspectives and things to care about, is assembling a group of people that like are really interested in learning. That's the 25 of us here, right? Because then the questions I had, the thoughts I had to bounce off of, I had like a safe place in which to do that. And so like, even if it was drinking from that fire hose, like at the end of the day, we had other people who were also doing it to talk with and to bounce our ideas off of. And I think that the most valuable thing I got out of all of this is not just like that there are all these amazing comics I had no idea existed, but also how do I use them, right? Like the teaching with them is the important part, and every single person brought a new way to look at comics, a new way to understand them, a new way to use them that I can then take bits and pieces of to put in my own classroom. And so that was really amazing.
I think the Institute did a good job of showcasing a diverse group of instructors that gave us different approaches and their own perception for how they do different topics. For me, each session, even the activities or field trips that we did that were off campus, it made me think of my students. So I was able to see there was a student that may be a reluctant reader, someone who was not a strong reader that could be able to learn something from each instructor, or someone who was a student that transfers and comes to my school and they're trying to get assimilated to my actual building. I could find ways, unique ways to pull resources that could support them or help them feel more included.
Thank you. So one of the things I did as the librarian for this institute was introduced over 130 YA books on comics and social issues. So how I did that was I looked at all of their applications and we had them talk about what social issues were most important to their students, what were they grappling with, what kinds of curriculum were they interested in creating by coming to this institute, and tried to pull out threads and common themes that I could find YA books that would meet that need. So we had, as you can see, a huge display that was up for a week and a half while we were working on working through the lesson plans, working through all of the guest lectures and everything. And then something that I had not anticipated that was actually really exciting was being able to do individual with some of our participants, like, hey, I'm looking for something like this. And if it wasn't out that I had already pulled it, we would run out into the library's collection. We are one of the universities in the United States that has a very large, strong comics collection. We have over 120,000 published comics in addition to archival collections. So, and then we have a young adult children's juvenile collection as well that includes comics. So we would run out there and find things that worked for them, and because they were off campus or staying in some of our dorms, I would run downstairs with my my ID card, my library card, and check out a bunch of books, on our system, bring them back on Wednesday, So we used well over 130 books in this institute. Okay, and then we switched gears a little bit too, because our teachers were interested in not just teaching students to think critically and do critical close reading of comics, but also some comics making. So we invited a local artist, writer, producer, and director, Mark Habegger, some of you might know him, I know you do, to lead a 3-hour comics making workshop. And one of his goals with doing this workshop, the way he structured it, he really thought about it when we talked to him, was he was hoping to teach a method that would help teachers empower students who think they can't draw. So just to make everyone believe, like, yeah, you can do this. And then we also went to, I don't know if people here know Little Fish Comic Book Studio here in town. It's owned and operated by Alonzo Nunez. We went out there on a Saturday and we had an opportunity to split into groups and witness 2 different ways of running comics workshops. One of them was for much younger children, and then one of them was for older teens to adults. And so we got to watch some of that instruction happen and then also sit there and make comics while we were doing it as well. And then Beth, would you like to talk about our other field trips?
Oh, well, we get to ask the participants what they thought of the comics making, right? Because San Diego State University, we have such a strength in the critical analysis of comics, especially with relationship to social justice issues. Well, that was one breath. We have such a strength in that, but we did reach out into the community for this comic making, and it was exciting for us to watch that. But I think Pam and I wanted to know what you all thought about the comics making.
I thought
Ilani's going to go first. Jump on it, Ilani.
We're so excited. The comic making process was, it had me tap back into my childhood, being able to actually do shapes and actually make that into an image. So I think that was a good aspect of that, and really showing that there's a process to it, and everything is sort of strategic when you're actually putting it on the page.
Yeah, for me, something that I really enjoyed is that both Alonzo at Little Fish and also Mark, they were like, drawing is the bread and butter, but also if that's not what you're most comfortable with, cut out things to help make it, supplement images in the background, be creative, and really empower yourself and your students to try different things to feel comfortable. And so my sister does flower images. She takes pictures of flowers, and she and I are like, oh, we should make a little mini comic together to show my kids, and it's a really non-traditional medium. It would be pictures and it would be written words and flowers, but they were able to infuse creativity within me that makes me feel really confident and bringing that back to my students. And as teachers, the best thing you can do is be so excited that your kids can't help but be excited too. So
for me, it was really exciting and also eye-opening, because as Mark was going through, do this, I was one of those students who's like, I can't draw, I'm a terrible artist. But it's like, okay, I can do this. And it also it put me in the position of how my students feel when I ask them to do something and they feel like they can't. And I'm like, oh, you can do it. But I'm like, oh, okay. So it gives me even more empathy, and it also gives me the vocabulary and the ability to encourage them and help them and actually give them step-by-step instructions and directions on how to get what they're thinking and what they're feeling onto the paper. So that was really exciting.
I think for me, I'm gonna be completely honest, when I came into this, I thought comics was a really rigid, there are 4 boxes, you have to fill out each box, there are spaces between the boxes, you hand the kids a template, you draw a story throughout the template. And so I think for me, this comic making workshop in particular was really probably one of the most eye-opening parts, because I love art. I am not necessarily good at storytelling in 6 paneled boxes. But the way in which this comic making workshop started was just drafting a character idea in the center of the page and then working off of that and drawing out the actual panels and the gutters later on, right? So developing that over time. And I think that's something that really teaches the flexibility of comics, which is something that I'm really hoping to bring back to my students, is that it's not some rigid, you need 6 panels and a story, component in each panel, but you can just kind of build it out into whatever you want it to be.
That's awesome. Okay, so now Beth.
Yes. So one of, easily one of our most valuable partners here in the city of San Diego is the Comic-Con Museum. We've developed a good relationship, really close relationship with Emily Schindler, who is the education director at the Comic-Con Museum. And Emily was kind enough to welcome all 25 participants to the Comic-Con Museum on a Monday afternoon, the very first day of our institute. And she worked with our participants through a range of activities. In particular, she was getting our participants to think about multiple literacies, multimodal texts, and sent them out on a hands-on activity in the museum itself, which was incredibly valuable, I think, for the participants to look at some sort of object in the museum and to think of it as a text and to do a critical analysis of that object as a text. And it was just a great way to jump us right into what we were trying to do, shake up expectations of comics and how comics work. So we're so grateful to the Comic-Con Museum and Comic-Con in general for making that happen, especially speed walking the 25 professional memberships of our participants just a couple of like a month or so, 2 months prior to Comic-Con. So this was great.
Yeah, we should say that the Institute is actually still ongoing. So this is part of it for us. This is our final 5-day field trip as part of the Institute. So not too shabby for a field trip, right?
Great field trip. Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit to talk about those lesson plans. Katie, can you tell us a bit about lesson plan developing and how it fit into the Institute structure?
Sure. So I will say from the beginning that this is a huge challenge when you have such a range of teachers in one space. So I mean, I know many of my educator friends can relate to that, right? Trying to differentiate for this group of students was a challenge. Teachers, was a challenge. But I think one of the ways the way that I thought to do was to bring in theory as much as possible. So one, thinking about Paulo Freire's work on reading the word and the world and how that's really an essential component of social justice work, is looking at what kind of texts, what texts are saying about the world, the broader world, and circumstances that students are facing. And then also thinking about the complexity of the kids sitting in their midst. So everybody in our room had, in addition to their own diversities, they had their own kids' diversities, and then their content, and then their state mandates and the standards. So there was a lot to juggle. So we first started talking about what is it that makes a lesson relevant to a student. And so I drew upon my own work that's forthcoming about the complexity of relevance, looking at identity, temporality, spatiality, and ideology, and how all of those things combine when you're trying to make a lesson relevant to your kids. So starting with the theory, we also brought in a lot of the books that Pam selected. So I had gone through and I selected scenes where we could talk about what could make this scene relevant to your particular students, and all the teachers in one of the pods had a chance to respond as to how that particular scene could be relevant to their kids and their content area. And then we did a lot of workshopping. So it was a lot of hands-on. We started with drafting and enduring understanding. What is the big takeaway your students are going to have with respect to this lesson or unit related to social justice and your content area? And then they just kind of flew from there. So I worked a lot with the groups one-on-one, and got to check in with everybody at some point. Some people were a lot more independently focused and wanted to do their thing. Some people collaborated. So it was interesting to see how it played out, but teachers kind of went on their own and really, exerted their creativity as we got on the lesson planning part.
And I know we're going to talk about some of the lesson plans for the people represented up here, but were there things that stood out to you about any lesson plans that stood out, or aspects of lesson plans that stood out?
Well, that's a very hard question to ask me, but because I'm like, okay, now which of you are going to be mad at me right now?
Who was your favorite child, Katie?
Yeah,
Pick a favorite, Katie. Pick a favorite.
But so don't be mad. No, but I have to say they all stood out in different ways, and there were a lot of. But I will say that. I want to talk about the ones that pushed me to think differently about social justice in the classroom. And so, can you just, if you're a participant, can you just raise your hand if you don't want me to say your name? Don't want me to say your name? Okay, so I can say your names here. Okay. If I talk about your lesson. And now, can my participants actually stand up so we can see who I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. So every every teacher in this room should be commended for the amazing work that they're doing and that they're about to do when they go back into their classrooms. First of all, I just want to say that. I was blown away by the presentations that we had just a couple of days ago. And so remember, this is like lesson planning on the fly, like a week and a half. You're going to learn all this content. I'm going to give you a lesson plan template, and you're going to go. And you're reading new books at the same time. Some of them are ordering books and having them sent to the SDSU dorms so they could read them to plan a lesson around them. So I will say, okay, back to the question, which one stood out? And so August, would you mind raising your hand? August, where are you? Okay. Yeah. So August did a really incredible lesson on repatriation of artifacts from museums and the complexities of that and the dilemmas, and found some incredible works. It was a Batman comic. And that was an incredible, explicit connection to this notion of repatriation, and obviously combining it with Black Panther, and the scene where they're taking the things that belong to Wakanda and taking it back. So that was one thing. And then Adjua and Paul, can the two of you raise your hand, because yours had a connection that was very interesting. So. Both Adjua and Paul really focused on special education and advocacy for their students, and getting their students, in Paul's case, to recognize that what their disability was, but that it shouldn't be a thing, that they shouldn't look at it with a deficit perspective. So sort of take ownership of their disability. So it was really framed from a student-centered perspective. And Adjua's was, in her case, there were a lot of students who were nonverbal. So looking at gardening and how can the students see themselves as agents of change with respect to environmental justice, but also looking at themselves and what does a gardener look like? What does a farmer look like? So those were just a couple. And again, everybody in here who stood up, please ask them about the lesson plan they made, because they really did some cool work that I am not going to adequately capture. I probably didn't even capture yours adequately. So I just wanted to say that. Please ask them about the things they did.
Well, and just to follow up on that, a number of our participants have agreed to allow us to showcase some of their work on our website, comics.sdsu.edu. So you can follow up on our website as well.
Okay, are you ready? I'm now going to ask our participants to each talk about their lesson plan a little bit. So I made you some slides, just one slide per each. So Daryl, Can you talk a little bit about what you did?
Sure. So my approach was finding the book first, because I thought that would be easiest to think in my collection and be able to use digital resources, because that was one of the tools that we went over, actually how to use digital platforms to find comics to use for our resources for lessons. So I choose Parachute Kids because it focused on immigration and race, but within it also focused on perseverance and bullying. So that's always a hot topic with fifth graders, dealing with social interaction with others and understanding just the concept of being able to know how to actually work with someone else and then being able to be in a new situation. So my approach was applying that to where we broke it down in sessions. So my lesson plan focuses on visits to the library, where I will collaborate with the teacher, and it will tie in ELA and social studies standards that will focus on citizenship and actual digital literacy as well. So my lesson will gear toward tying that in and making sure that the kids understand what are your rights, what's a visa status, things like that, that will be able to tie into the standards for social studies.
Excellent, thank you. Marcella.
Hello, it's me. So me and Phoenix. Phoenix, raise your hand. Yay!
Yes.
So we co-created a lesson, or a unit actually, which is really cool. So she teaches 6th, I teach 7th. She teaches in California, where you guys have a whole wide range of standards that are centered around like citizenship and like literacy, like media literacy. And I'm in North Carolina, and we have a little bit less, but it's just as important. Don't you all think it isn't? And so something that was really, really cool is like a big part of middle school is like, we know they're on social media. They know they're on social media. You as parents know your kids are on social media. But like our kids have a lot of questions about what's going on, and like TikTok moves so fast and YouTube algorithms change like in seconds, and so we thought it was really important that our students learn and understand how to navigate dis and misinformation, right? Like the worst thing that can happen is our students get the bad information and they spread it, and because we all know bad information spreads like wildfire. And so we wanted to work to help them identify how to combat that. And so our lesson is centered on this book, Killer Underwear Invasion, and it's a really great lesson. And talking to high school and elementary school teachers, they said they think it will scale up and down really well, which feels really good from me and Phoenix's perspective. And it brings in a wide variety of sources that you can use to help your students understand critical thinking. And so at the end of the day, our job is to equip them to be critical media viewers. And this really, really applies to comics because every single page, every single book can be viewed in a critical lens, right? We talked about, in our institute, we talked about being able to, like, critical visual literacy. So, like, when we look at an image, is it AI? Is it real? What is it saying to us? And those of us who were in the panel yesterday, right before preview night, they showed us a Superman panel. They're like, what do you see? Why do you think you see that? Break it down. It's not just these 4 colored blocks, right? There's something else inside of that. And so this lesson is geared to help our students understand the things that they're looking at, understand how to find good, reliable sources, and to be good community members that share positive, real information, fact-based information. So,
Excellent. Ivalani.
All right, so Katie was talking and she said, she gave us this information and we really flew. I did not fly. I plummeted directly to the ground from the nest because I was struggling. I knew I wanted to do West African kingdoms, and so then actually I chatted with Katie and she really helped me. So I say that, so if you are thinking about doing this and you are struggling a little bit, it's okay. Chat with someone who is that support. And then, go for it. But so we have West African societies as a standard in Virginia. And I've learned from previous years when my students come into class and I ask them what do they know about Africa, it's always, oh, that's where slaves came from. And then, of course, I have to correct them and tell them we don't use the term slaves, we use enslaved. And everybody lives in huts, and it's poor, and it's desolate, and they have this negative thinking about the continent of Africa that sometimes they think is a country when it is a whole continent. So I really wanted to break down that thinking and really change it. So in my lesson, after we talk about the things that they know about Africa and they are negative or one-sided, we're going to talk about why it's important to learn more than one aspect of a place's history, and we're going to look at Black Panther. We're going to look at Wakanda and how Wakanda is wealthy and it's rich, and they have vibranium that people want, and that they have this beautiful, rich culture. And so as we do that, then we're going to dive into information on Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, and we're going to find, and they're going to see that Ghana, Mali, and Songhai prior to colonization was the same. They had kings, they were rich, they have this rich culture, they have gold and salt that people want. And so really using something that they know, Black Panther and Wakanda, with something that they are not familiar with, the richness and the beauty of Africa prior to colonization, and also that Africa is still rich in beauty and culture and people today. So that we can make sure that I can make sure, and you, when you use this lesson, make sure that they are learning more than one aspect of a place's history, because that also impacts how students think about people who come from places, particularly Africa, because if they think of it negatively, then they tend to connect those things with people from those places.
Oops. Sorry about that. Thank you. Morgan.
Yay. So mine is not about a security update. I did not fall from the nest, but I did sprint around a field back and forth like 100 times trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to kind of go about this. And ultimately, I knew I wanted to work with representation, and also not just representation, but misrepresentation. Because comics is not this infallible, right, medium of, there's so many diverse graphic novels and visual representations of these different identities and aspects. There's also a really long history of stereotyping and caricatures and tokenizing. And I wanted to have students kind of essentially critically analyze the way in which we see representation in pop culture and how we view progress, right? So my idea behind this was, in essence, trying to take various aspects of comics, right? So maybe a newer comic, maybe a couple older comics that look at different identities through different views and in different ways, and have students kind of compare across, right? So like, who is being represented? How are they being represented? What's the author's background? Do they identify with that representation that they're doing, or are they coming from a different background? And where we can see kind of like how that plays to the public's perceptions and how it influences the public's perception as well. And seeing that across time, because even now we're seeing representations that are not infallible, right? They're still problematic. We still see things that might still be playing on stereotypes or tokenizing and not providing an authentic, actual representation of an identity. Off of that, I came up with a whole bunch of other lessons while I was running around the field. They are kind of listed there. They will probably, I'll give them to everyone to post online at another point. But between book banning and educational spaces, in my diversity and social justice class, I want to do diversity book club, giving students various ways to connect to the curriculum we're using, and using these different varied perspectives across varying books, one being a graphic novel. Youthism and advocacy is a really important one for me. I am really passionate about youthism and age discrimination against youth, and specifically youth activists. So I think comics, although there's not a lot of comics completely dedicated to youth activism, there are a lot that touch on that subject and that you can pull those kind of topics from to empower and encourage youth to get engaged.
You can always have your students write one. Wow, you all just brought down the house. I've been standing up here listening to this and just, yes. I feel like there's an Olympic gymnast in me going, yeah, wow. This has been wonderful. Do we have, how much time do we have? Do we have questions from the audience?
Perfect.
15 minutes. So that's,
yes.
that's like an excellent time to pause and see, does anyone in the audience have questions for our group? I know a lot of you are fellow participants. Maybe you have something you wanted to say or questions for anyone? Yes.
honor their individuality, yet still hold them to some kind of productivity, assess that actively at that age bracket?
I'll step in. For me, as a librarian, my approach to my lesson was doing a culminating task that will focus on tying in what they learned, where they could actually showcase it to me. So we're doing a story walk where they're actually going to have to create an image or write a story that we can display in the hallway to show their understanding of the standard and be able to communicate that to others. So my approach was different from doing assessments, but more so being able to let them be the experts on the topic.
And I just wanted to actually, Jamie, was it you who had the choice for the assessments? Would you say a little bit about what you did, because yours comes to mind for me?
For mine, their assessment was going to be, they had choice words. They could read a comic, they could analyze a song, they could look at a primary source, they could read a newspaper article, they could read like a bunch of different things they could do. And their assessment was going to be basically the same thing. They could create a splash page of a comic, they could write a poem, or they could write a song. They could even make like a news broadcast if they wanted to. The only thing I wasn't really going to let them allow them to do is an essay. For various reasons, but I mean, there's a whole bunch of things they were able to do. So like student choice is like, the kids like it.
Is it because you're tired of reading essays?
For me.
For my lesson, I just wanted to be more creative and that's it. They use that as a pop-up.
For me, I have chosen, me and my co-teacher, I co-teach. Me and my co-teacher have chosen to make our humanities class project-based, so we teach in month-ish, 6-week-long units, and so we do a project at the end that is like Daryl said, a culminating understanding of information. So like when we do at the very beginning of the year, I teach world history, we do like continent identifications, and so we'll teach about the 5 themes of geography, they'll learn about the continents, and then they do a travel brochure, right? And so that hits research standards. organization of information, reliable sources. And then when they put it together, it's like, can you write a paragraph? Because like, you know, in brochures, you're not writing like pages. It's like, can you write a paragraph? Do they have good understanding of punctuation, capitalization? It's the beginning of the year. We don't really know what's coming up from 6th grade. Can they organize information in an attractive way? Can they follow directions? And so it's like not individual, like not doing an assignment for every individual standard, but finding an assignment that combines a bunch of standards together and allows them to be creative, because we find that when our students have a creative outlet at the end, and comics is perfect for that, they're often super engaged and super excited. And am I grading them on how Picasso they are? Of course not. But it's the effort, and you know when your students tried and when they engaged, and you know when they didn't.
And you don't have to have answers, but if you do, anyone else?
I was just going to ask one more person to talk from the audience, actually, real quick, is David. So David's one of our partners. David, would you mind sharing? So the reason I'm thinking of you, David, is because you had a little bit more of a rigid structure with respect to how you could incorporate comics. So if you could say a little bit about how you worked in the assessment with what you had going on.
Well, I would try to, I'm trying to remember what my lesson was. So much like with Comic-Con going on that I'm kind of blanking out. I know, like, we always try to have a rubric and have like specific guidelines that we're going to follow. That always helps out a lot, especially with that as you go. But also, we use our stuff. I'm going to use this as a piece, not as the whole thing, and then we'll just keep branching from that. Katie, I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for or not. Seriously, John, I'm not sure. But no, I really think the rubric is probably, I mean, that's your bread and butter. Once you put that down, this is what you're looking for, and so you know how to assess it. So you're not going to focus on the art, but you're going to focus on the content itself and just make sure that that is where your focus is, for me anyway, because I'm not an art kind of guy anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing to say too, that none of our teachers were art teachers. I mean, we had some good artists,
Yeah.
but none of them were art teachers, so they weren't going to be grading probably on the art.
Right, and one of the other things we taught early on in the Institute was the formalistic vocabulary for talking about comics, for how comics are created. And so all of our participants built this vocabulary, and it's a vocabulary with which you can assess students' critical analysis of comics, but also their application of those formalistic elements. You know, like Morgan was saying, it's not just 6 boxes, but what are they doing to innovate with the page, with panels, with foreground, midground, background, all of these different elements of talking about what's happening in comics. So it's not just, oh, that's cool, and it told a great story, but everyone learned, I think, some good vocabulary for talking about and evaluating comics. Yeah.
I saw a hand over there, yes.
Thanks so much for this session and for this project. I'm a law professor, but I have written comic book series.
Oh, yay.
The Insurrection has succeeded. We've got a free education action guide. I know some folks at SDSU are using it, so thank you so much. My question is, what is the best way for us to reach and support more teachers at, all across the education spectrum? You might want to use this series to address, teach issues of democracy, discrimination, disinformation, also youth activism, issue 3 coming soon.
Woo! Oh, perfect.
Yes, I'm very passionate, but I would love your thoughts about other ways to reach and support educators.
So I get your emails and have used your work in our current exhibit that's at San Diego State. We have an exhibit up called Rising Up, Depictions of Social Protest in Comics. So, but for teachers at the K-12 levels, how would you find out about a comic like that? How would you learn about it in order to know that it exists to be able to use it? Is there some listservs or anything like that?
Well, for me, when I did my research, I used Common Sense Media. So that gave a great list of the books, if it's recommendations, if it's suitable for your grade level, and it had parents' references as well. So that would be my first approach, being able to showcase that so that when we're finding books for lessons, we can be able to refer to that. And then I think also partnering with local teacher organizations. For me, I'm part of the Georgia Library Media Association, so we collectively share lessons and information. So that's usually the best way to get it communicated and in the hands of educators, particularly librarians.
Others?
Oh, go ahead, Marcella.
No, I'm looking and seeing if they want to.
Did you have?
I was gonna, yeah, I was just gonna throw out there, I think a lot of the time, especially with text like that, it can be really hard because you can't necessarily just go through like department coordinators and convince them to put that out in an email. I've dealt with that in previous years. But I think that oftentimes if you can find educational platforms that are also really credible behind the scenes to put that out, so some of the ways in which I've been able to get maybe critically looked at texts, at least within my district, is if I can find them through resources like Learning for Justice or the Southern Poverty Law Center. Those kind of curriculum, like government-based organizations or legal-based organizations that are also putting out curriculum and tying it like very intentionally to various standards, because that provides us with a little more justification and support for why we're bringing it into the classroom.
That's a really good point, Morgan. I heard someone else earlier, last week or something, mention too that in order to justify a purchase of comics at their school, they had to have 2 or 3 reviews out there, and they would bring those reviews and show that. So getting it reviewed, but then also a lot of publishers are doing this now on their website too, where they're actually creating curriculum that people can use, and so that as well, yeah.
The thing I was going to add was university school partnerships. So, just like this, and I know I have my colleague over here, Rocco Versace, too. There's a lot of university college professors who are local to wherever you are, who are doing work in comics that relates to social justice, and a lot of times they're a wealth of information. And I would definitely encourage teachers to look into what's happening at their local on their local university campuses and see if there's anybody, what kind of classes are being offered, what kind of texts are being used there, and to really build their reading list accordingly, and even to reach out to some of the professors and see, do you have any suggestions for me? Do you have text for me? Like the participants that Pam and Beth assembled so brilliantly, there are so many of them who are a wealth of resource. I'm hoping they will serve as a wealth of resource to our teachers as they continue out in the field. But this kind of thing, I think, could be replicated in other places.
And I had one more other resource. It's called teachingbooks.com. It has every publisher that has a book, it breaks it down for you so that you can be able to tie it to a different standard. And then it has a platform section that's strictly for educators where we can develop information, lesson plans. So that's another avenue that you use as well.
Can I throw out one more thing? Sorry, I also have one more thing. Just on the basis of the legal aspect, and this is going to depend very heavily on the regionality of it, university, and the partnership between the law school and the actual school district. But the street law program is another one that if you can kind of partner maybe with street law programs to try and provide some kind of curriculum that ties into their justice course, for them to kind of bridge that gap into those public schools as well, because I know street law does that a lot.
Great. Other questions? We have a couple more minutes, I think. Yes.
So I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I was just wondering what that lesson
It's
Where is
Savannah.
Savannah?
Savannah.
There's Savannah.
Yay!
This is a picture of it.
It's right there.
Here it is.
It's
She
right
has it in her
there.
hand.
Well, awesome. I want to give a huge round of applause to all of our panelists and all of our participants. I think I was beating the microphone there, I'm sorry. It's been a wonderful week and a half, 2 weeks almost. We have some swag talking about our other panels that SDSU faculty will be on throughout the weekend here at Comic-Con. And thank you all so much.
Before we roll, I would like to publicly, from all of us, thank Pam and Beth and Katie for putting this together. It's been amazing.
Yeah! Thank you all.
And participants, come up to the front so we can get our group picture in front of the
Yeah.
Comic-Con background.
We did it.